Welcome to episode 456 of The Holy Post. On today's show, we talk about CT President Tim Dalrymple's recent article about why evangelicals are so divided as he looks at media fracturing, celebrity leadership culture, and homogenous communities are tearing us apart. Then, my interview with Bob Roberts, the most interesting evangelical in the world, and his deep engagement and friendship with people of multiple faiths, and why we need to engage with those outside the Christian bubble, not just for their sake, but for the strengthening of our own faith. All that, plus the battle of the Joshes. But first, this week's podcast is being brought to you by you, those faithful listeners who've become Patreon supporters of The Holy Post that have made this show possible. If you are not yet a Patreon supporter, why not? You get all kinds of great things like bonus material, lengthened interviews with some of your favorite guests. You get to do a live stream with us every month where me, Phil, and Christian get to answer your questions live via Zoom on YouTube. All kinds of special material and merchandise that gets sent to you depending on which level you support us. So if you are not yet a Patreon supporter and you believe that content like The Holy Post is really critical in this moment and you want more people to engage it, then go to holypost.com and click the support button, and you can learn more about becoming a Patreon supporter and all the different benefits you'll get from doing that beyond just keeping this show going. So with all that, let's jump into it. Here's episode 456 of The Holy Post.
Hey there, this is Phil Vischer. Welcome back to the Holy Post podcast. I am here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
And Christian Taylor. Hi, Christian.
Hello there, Phil.
And Jason Rugg. Hi, Jason.
Hey there.
Jason made bad technical things happen last time, just through his presence. But
he just wanted me to disappear.
Yeah, he's going to... Christian completely vanished at the end of the show. Geez, hopefully you went. Did you go to a better place, Christian?
I went to a better place. I did. I wanted to be one with the world.
We're back, and we're going to do it again. And here's the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian.
Okay, Christian, remind people from last week you mentioned that they could actually see your film, The Girl Who Wore Freedom, your documentary, your award-winning documentary that's taking the world by storm. And they could watch it somewhere online. Where is the where and when is the when?
Yep. So it's the GI Film Festival. It's on May 19th at 7:15 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So you'll watch it live, and then afterwards there will be a Q&A with me and the composer Jeff Kurtenacker. So I would encourage everybody to tune in. We are nominated again for the Best Documentary and for the Best First-Time Filmmaker. So come and support us. And I'd love to meet you virtually and answer your questions. So this is a great opportunity, if you want to meet me, to show up.
So the question everyone is probably asking is, Christian, winning so many awards, are you now fabulously wealthy?
No, but I will tell you, I did win $4,000 at the Dubuque International Film Festival.
Hey.
And Chagrin Doc Fest, I won $1,500. So guess what? I've pretty much paid for all the film festival entry fees.
It's a wash. That's great.
I've spent about $7,000 to win these awards. So, I've kind of broke even, I guess. And I will tell you one other thing. Unlike Trump, I am not so tired of winning.
Okay. So it doesn't get old.
Not yet.
Okay. I don't know if you heard about this. Hundreds of people named Josh met up in Lincoln, Nebraska to battle with pool noodles over their shared name.
Did you make this up?
What?
This sounds like something you made up to tease Josh Lindsay.
Lincoln, Nebraska. I have family roots in Lincoln, Nebraska, actually, my mother's side of the family. What started as an early pandemic joke evolved into a full-fledged spectacle on Saturday, a couple weeks ago, as hundreds of people named Josh gathered in Lincoln, Nebraska to duke it out over their shared name. An Arizona college student, so it wasn't even from Lincoln, Nebraska. It was an Arizona college student named Josh Swain sent a Facebook message last April to dozens of other people who had his same first and last name. He said, "You're probably wondering why I've gathered you all here today. Because we all share the same names," answered another Josh Swain. The original Josh wrote back precisely, along with a random date, April 24th, 2021, and instructions to meet at these coordinates, which happened to be the coordinates of Lincoln, Nebraska. And he said, "We fight. Whoever wins gets to keep the name. Everyone else has to change their name. You have a year to prepare. Good luck."
Wow.
That is interesting.
He said just days before the Josh fight, Swain told one newspaper he still wasn't sure if anyone would show up. There was no evidence that anyone would show up. But hundreds of Joshes arrived to the large green space at Air Park for the Battle of the Joshes Saturday, equipped with pool noodles as he had instructed. Hundreds of people in a park in Lincoln, Nebraska, all named Josh, show up from all over the country with pool noodles to fight.
That
I
doesn't
wonder if this is
sound
gonna
COVID
start
friendly.
Yeah, really. I wonder if this is going to start a trend. But I had not Googled, but I went on Facebook to find out if there were any other Christian tailors, because for some reason I thought I was unique and special. But then when I went on Facebook, I was like, holy cow, there's a lot of Christian tailors out there, including like a track star. But I don't know that I would want to meet them all. Would you want to meet them all?
Do you want to battle them all with pool noodles?
I don't think I'd want to fight over my name.
So photos and videos shared by the Lincoln Journal-Star on social media showed the fighters wielding their pool noodles, some decked out in Spider-Man and Star Wars-themed costumes. People not named Josh stood on the sidelines to cheer on their fighters with T-shirts and signs that read, "I'm with Josh," "Team Josh," and "Go Josh, beat Josh." One sign had a tournament bracket predicting the outcome of the fight with Josh written on every line. In the end, you want to know how it ended?
Yeah, I
yes,
do.
A big happy group hug.
In the end, a 4-year-old Lincoln resident named Josh Vinson Jr. was deemed the ultimate Josh. He was raised up on their shoulders and paraded around the park.
But I thought they all had to be Josh Swain.
No, they didn't all have to be Josh Swain. They just all had to be Josh.
Just Josh's. Huh.
Well, I have to give Jason Rugg a moment to tell us what about the other Jason Rugg?
There's only one other main Jason Rugg I've been able to find, and as far as I know, he's still in prison in Florida. So he's a Florida man.
No, for trying to kill you, so he'd be the only one. Is that why he's in prison?
I don't think so. I think he's been in prison a long time.
Really?
So.
Wow. I can guarantee there is not another Skye Jitani anywhere on this planet.
I am
Have
not
you Googled?
Oh yeah,
aware of another Phil Vischer either.
Yeah, there isn't. My parents had foresight and knew that I was going to need a URL available in the 21st century, so they gave me a very unique name.
I met another Phil Vischer, Visser, which is a Dutch version.
I was going to ask you that.
Edmonton, Canada.
I just found a Dutch resistance worker in my study on my next film, and his name was Visser, and I wondered if you had relatives there.
No, that's not. No, we're the German. We're the German side, which is Vischer. That's how Germans talk. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. We have a bigger story to talk about today. We actually said we would talk about this. I think it's like 2 weeks ago now. The Tim Dalrymple piece he's the CEO of Christianity Today magazine. He's a friend of ours. We actually go to church with him these days, called The Splintering of the Evangelical Soul, Why We're Coming Apart and How We Might Come Together Again. And first of all, I wanted to point out, Skye, that this is yet another article or blog piece, titled as a derivative of The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind by Mark Knoll, which makes me wonder if that's one of the most influential book titles in the evangelical world.
Yeah, it might be, because I know there's a Scandal of the Evangelical Conscience, which was written by Ron Sider. There's got to be. I suppose we could Google it, but
you take a verb. You need a verb and then a noun. If you could probably do it with anything, like the running of the evangelical bulls. just a verb
Yeah.
and a noun.
But the scandal thing is really nice, though. The scandal of the
Scandal
evangelical
helps.
fill in the blank. You need a noun at the end, right?
Okay, so the splintering of the Evangelical Soul, you use like half credit.
Yeah, it's in the family, but it's not a direct relation.
Okay. So Tim Dalrymple kind of went to town on this piece. It's long. He's trying to figure out why we're so against each other. What do you do when you feel you're losing the people you love to a false reality? Because he was talking with some college friends within the evangelical world on how they've got family members, they've got old friends that they can hardly talk to anymore because their cultural beliefs or political beliefs or beliefs about viruses or beliefs about, a whole host of issues have become so radically different. Fellow believers who once stood shoulder to shoulder now find that tectonic shifts have thrust them apart. Their continents are separating and they cannot find a bridge back to common ground. So then, Christian, does this ring a bell? Are you resonating with this at all?
It does ring a bell.
Okay. So he talks about two curves. Then he gets kind of academic on this. He talks about the plausibility curve and the information curve. Okay. The plausibility curve is basically a graph of what you find implausible to what you find the most plausible. And it's like a bowl, an upside down bowl with implausible, and then the most plausible is the center of the bowl. He says, what determines the plausibility of a given claim is how well it conforms to what a person experiences, already believes, and wants to believe. So if a new idea or something you see or read or experience lines up with other things you already believe, you're more likely to believe it.
That's confirmation bias.
It can
Probably.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. He says attempts to change a single belief can feel fruitless when it is embedded in countless other beliefs. Evidence to the contrary is almost irrelevant when a claim fits with an entire network of reinforcing beliefs. Yeah, that would be confirmation bias, right?
Yeah, that's a whole long, complicated way of going around it.
A plausibility curve can expand, contract, or shift. But how does this happen? That's where the information curve comes in. So now imagine a mirror image bowl above the plausibility curve. This is the information curve, and it reflects the individual's external sources of information about the world and how much they're trusted. So sources that you don't trust at all, that you consider untrustworthy, are outside of your information curve, and then your most trusted sources are at the very center of your information curve. The center of the information curve will generally align with the center of the plausibility curve. The relationship is mutually reinforcing. Okay, Christian, does that make sense?
Yeah, so let me just clarify. Go ahead, Skye.
Another way of putting this, which is not doing justice to the complexity of what Dalrymple's written about, but a simple way of putting it is the plausibility curve is what you want to be true, and the information curve is the source that tells you it is true. Does that make sense? So what you want to believe is true, and then you only want to listen to the sources that are going to tell you that it is true.
So is it? Yeah,
again, that's all wrapped around confirmation bias. I mean, this is nothing new. I'm waiting for something, revelatory here.
All right.
It's coming.
With me. We'll see where we go. He says, consider the 9/11 truth movement and the QAnon movements. Most Americans will find the notion that the Bush administration orchestrated a terrorist attack on ourselves in order to invade the Middle East and enrich their friends in the oil industry as beyond the bounds of their plausibility curve. Others, however, will find that, that makes sense. That makes sense. I could see them doing that. Conservatives, some people would say, of course, conservatives would sacrifice thousands of innocent lives to justify a war for oil because conservatives are greedy, and that's what conservatives do. And then on the other end, people say, it totally makes sense that Democrats would have a child sex ring in the basement of a pizza parlor and, would do terrible things to children. They would say, of course, liberals would sacrifice thousands of children in order to advance their own health and power because liberals are perverse, and that's what liberals do. So he calls this whole structure, the plausibility curve and the information curve, an informational world. This is the informational world we're in, where we accept data based on our general tendency to find it plausible. Okay, still with me, Christian?
I'm still with you, but I haven't heard anything new.
Okay, this is the scandal of the Dalrymple mind, I guess, if he's not impressing Christian Taylor. So the American evangelical movement, this is the evangelical crisis. What held that movement together historically was not only a shared set of moral and theological commitments, but a broadly similar view of the world and common sources of information. So as evangelicals, our plausibility curves and our information curves largely overlapped. We generally looked at the same way. And that's partly because, you have to say that's partly because of the cultural homogeneity of white evangelicalism, because we're not talking about, and Latino evangelicals and black evangelicals in the 1940s all believe the same thing. No, when you use evangelical, you're referring largely to white evangelicals. It was a white church movement. This sense of commonality grew increasingly strained as groups not formally identified as evangelical came to be lumped together, defining the category evangelical less in theological terms and more in social, cultural, and political terms. So now this broader evangelical movement today is dividing into separate communities that still hold some moral and theological commitments in common, but differ dramatically on their sources of information and their broader view of the world. Okay, Christian?
I'm with you.
You with me? Okay. So now we've made a much bigger pot of evangelicals, still mostly white, by and large white, but with some much more culturally different than others and not pulled together by a similar view of the world.
Well, just hang on for 1 second.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, it just seems like there was a big split because there were people who did get the same sources of information. They were evangelical, they were white, they were Republican, they were sort of in the same subculture. And then it seems to me that subculture split. And so you have some people in that subculture that are still white, evangelical, and, very Christian and theologically conservative, but aren't in crazy town. and you know what I mean? But something happened. There was a split.
I wouldn't want to define it as in crazy town or not in crazy town, because there are multiple crazy towns.
That's true.
There's the crazy.
So forget the dog whistle crazy town.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah. So today he says one group within American evangelicalism believes our religious liberties have never been more firmly established. Another, that they have never been at greater risk. One group believes racism is still systemic in American society. Another, that systemic racism pushes a progressive program to redistribute wealth and power to angry radicals. One is more concerned with the insurrection at the Capitol. The other with the riots that followed the killing of George Floyd.
You go.
Yeah. One believes
that's exactly what I mean.
One believes the Trump presidency was generationally damaging to Christian witness. Another, that it was enormously beneficial. One believes the former president attempted a coup. Another, that the Democrats stole the election. One believes masks and vaccines are marks of Christian love. Another, that the rejection of the same is a mark of Christian courage.
Right. So how did we get here, and how do we get out of here?
Okay. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, Skye, jump in.
You can go all the way back to the first century, to the early church, to the writing of the epistles, the canonization of scripture, the gospels themselves. And what has always been essential for a united community of faith is an agreed upon shared authority. This is part of what the Apostle Paul was writing about in 1 Corinthians, because the church was all divided over I follow Paul and I follow Peter and I follow Apollos. And he's basically arguing in chapters 3 and 4 that his authority as an apostle is legitimate and you ought to basically listen to me. And he does that elsewhere. But it's all about shared authority. And where we're in right now is evangelicalism in America for a while more or less agreed on a shared authority. And I don't just mean the authority of Scripture. I mean the authority of Christian radio, the authority of Focus on the Family, the authority of Campus Crusade, the authority of Zondervan Publishing, or Christianity Today. Like there was an ecosystem of shared authority that they would listen to.
The authority of Moody Monthly Magazine.
That's right. So what's happened, I think, in the last 20 years, especially as the internet has expanded and social media and cable news is fractured, is evangelicals they no longer share a common submission to an authority. And one side has given authority to conservative political voices, the other side to more progressive political voices, and it has torn evangelicalism, white evangelicalism, apart. And that's what's changed. But we don't listen to the same podcasts. We don't listen to the same voices.
But hang on. Because on one hand, you could say we started listening to political voices more than spiritual voices. And now one side of evangelicalism is, shaped by Fox News and the other side is shaped by MSNBC. Except though, still, a lot of people are their most trusted sources of news are still Christian voices. They're just Christian voices that sound more like Fox News or Christian voices that sound more like MSNBC.
Right.
So is it that we're being shaped by politics, or is it that our leaders are being shaped by politics?
I think not to be too cynical again, but I think a lot of leaders recognize they're not really leading. They're following their customers. And their customers have been, meaning the evangelical kind of populace, has been shaped by political ideology. And if they want to hang on to those customers, they better not contradict their plausibility structures, right? What they want to be told. So I think a lot of the so-called leaders are actually following the sheep rather than leading them. And the sheep are all going in a conservative direction or all in a progressive direction, and the leaders are giving them what they want.
But how is this any different, Skye, from what we were talking about last week and what you were talking about in that devotional between the fundamentalist and the modernist? Because it sounds like to me we're sort of in a similar divide where 100 years ago, we were focusing on, not only just souls, but bodies. And there was this big argument over those two things. This is not that dissimilar, is it?
No, it's a great question, because what's interesting is right now, both sides are fundamentalists and both sides are modernists. And what I mean by that is both sides in a fundamentalist sense think they are absolutely right. And there's no tolerance for deviation or doubt or gray. It's all black and right. You are absolutely, I think David French said this, if you are 80% my friend, you're 100% my enemy. Like if you don't agree with me 100%, then you are on the outs, right? So that's a fundamentalist kind of quality. But we're all modernists now in the sense that even conservative, inerrantist, Bible-believing evangelicals who back in the day would say all that matters is saving souls and rescuing people off of a sinking ship kind of thing, even that side of the church now is deeply engaged in social activism and political activism. And they believe that we have to take back the government. We have to get the right people in office. So ever since the rise of the religious right, we have seen fundamentalist Christians who ran away from the culture re-engage with social activism, but on a conservative political spectrum. So it isn't that we're modernists and fundamentalists in the way we were 100 years ago. Now everyone is absolutely committed to their point of view, and everyone's absolutely committing to fighting for it in the public square, which is kind of frightening when you think about it.
Well, can we look back at that time and learn anything from that, Skye?
The thing that kept us, the thing that kept us from killing each other was a shared external enemy, which was communism. And now that that's gone,
we need more communists.
Now that that's gone, I wondered for a little bit when the 9/11 attack happened, would there be a sense of, okay, we have this external threat now of Islamic fundamentalist terrorism, but it didn't last very long as far as a unifying force within America, and we divided very quickly as soon as 2003 in the Iraq invasion. But we don't have an external threat now, so we're turning on each other. And this is American history. This is what we tend to do. And when you have divided media and a divided ideology and completely different information spheres, as Dalrymple's talking about, the last time that occurred, it led to civil war. And that's kind of frightening.
We do have external threats. If you're on the right, we have the woke mob. If you're on the left, we have white nationalist militias.
But they're all Americans. That's what I mean by external threat. Right. It's not a foreign outside threat.
I do have a real question here,
Jason,
which is pretty unusual for me.
Jason, go for it, Jason.
Do you think that's why Trump tried to villainize China so much? Because he wanted his Russia? He wanted his Soviet Union to take down? To put it as an external?
Maybe, but my understanding is when I've read things about his campaign back in 2015 and 16, what he tended to do was just throw a bunch of noodles up on the wall and see what stuck. Like the border wall thing, the build the wall. He didn't really care about the southern border, but when he threw that out and the crowds went nuts, he goes, "Oh, that's something. I'm going to keep doing that." And same thing with China. When he bring up China, the crowd would go nuts, and he goes, "Okay, that's another one that I'm going to make one of my greatest hits." So I don't think it was an ideological forethought on his mind. I think it's just this is what the crowd reacted to.
It was more like a band launching singles at top 40 radio and then collecting the ones that got airplay and playing them again and again. Okay.
Lock her up, build the wall, all that was.
Right.
That's similar to what you were just talking about in our Christian leaders, in a sense. You know, how our Christian leaders are looking for what the consumers want.
Does this work? Does this work?
Which going back to a couple of weeks ago, that to Phil's point, like, why do we hear so much about protecting our kids? That's why, because when people talk about that, they get a great response, right?
That's big, because the world coming for your kids is a lot like, immigrants are coming for our women,
right?
As what do I got to do? Tim Dalrymple, have I mentioned that name? He says, these are his conclusions. First, the crisis of media is acute. The digital media landscape has evolved to profit from our vices more than our virtues, and it has become incredibly effective at dividing audiences into hermetic media spheres that deliver only the information and commentary that confirms the audience's anxieties and antipathies. Okay, so we have a crisis of media. Okay, there's one. He said, who makes money by continuing to do that.
Right.
The longer we give ourselves to media gluttony, skimping on the deeper nourishment that cultivates Christ within us, the less we will have in common. That's a good point. Read the Bible more, Twitter less, and we'll find more common ground. Then he says, the evangelical movement also faces an authority crisis of its own making. The current generation
Skye said that.
The current generation of evangelical institutional leaders, though markedly more diverse than their forebears, struggle to rise above the rampant ideological othering of our time. The ideological othering. Wow, that's fun.
I wish Jesus would come back, because if he would, he could be the ultimate authority that we all could agree on.
He could settle all the fights. He could flip all the tables and settle all the fights.
And we could all agree on him, couldn't we?
The third way, so he's going through three ways to shift the informational curve. Okay. One is to cut down on the media gluttony. The second way is for our leaders, evangelical leaders of the movement, to, what are they supposed to do? do it better.
Lead with dignity.
Do it better. If it is ever to be true again that broadly respected authorities form an important part of our shared information curve, it will be because we turn from a culture of celebrity to a culture of sanctification. Okay, so we actually follow the people that look like Jesus rather than the people that look like Kim Kardashian or, Tom Cruise or
Franklin Graham.
Valid.
So
I was going to say that.
That was his third point, the celebrity culture thing? Or is
no,
that the second?
Third point is, that was the second point. That was the second point is leadership.
Yeah.
First point was media, too much media gluttony. Second point is leadership, celebrity culture. Third way to shift the information curve is to address our crisis of community. This hyperpolitization of the American evangelical movement has led to a political sorting. Congregants who do not like their pastor's stances depart for other churches whose politics are the same as theirs. But congregations comprised of individuals whose informational worlds are nearly identical will tend toward rigidity and increasing radicalism. Rather than withdrawing into communities of common loathing, that's a good description for what we like to make. Oh man, do you see that on Facebook? Even among some of my family members, it's like, yeah, we're all here to loathe the same people.
It's a good thing your family doesn't listen to this podcast.
No, yeah, none of them do, and they wouldn't even
Wouldn't
know.
that make for a great
Good thing
church
mine don't
sign?
either.
Like,
Yes.
Grace Church, a community of common loathing.
Loathing.
Come loathe with us each Sunday.
The church coming for our time of public loathing. The church should be offering a community of common love, a sanctuary from the fragmentation and polarization. Boy, is that easier said than done.
Yeah.
Michael Emerson, a sociologist and scholar of American religion at the University of Illinois at Chicago, recently said he's studied religious congregations for 30 years, but has never seen such an extraordinary level of conflict. What is different now, he asked. The conflict is over entire worldviews, politics, race, how we are to be in the world, and even what religion and faith are for. So we've got a crisis of community, a crisis of media, and a crisis of leadership. Well, that just about covers it.
Okay, so here's my question, and maybe we should have.
At least our cars have become more reliable. So that's
There's that.
I think
good.
we should have Tim on sometime where we can talk more about this and unpack it.
Yeah.
And since he's local, like the first one, change the way we consume media. That's something I, as an individual, can choose to do differently. The celebrity leadership culture thing, that is also something as an individual I can choose to submit myself to godly leaders rather than just celebrity leaders. But the third one is a bit more challenging because of the big sort. Right? Americans are increasingly living in communities that are homogeneous, where everyone thinks and votes the same way. So in that case, it's harder to find a faith community, a church that is really going to be a diverse collection of people culturally and politically. We happen to live in an area where that's still possible, but in a lot of parts of the country, that's really hard to do. If you live in a city, you're probably going to be worshiping with a lot of more progressive people. And if you live in a rural area, good luck finding anybody who voted for Joe Biden in your church. So that sorting that's happening on a national level between blue and red means we're going to be sorting into our churches the same way.
Well, so I have a couple of problems with what you just said.
Oh.
So number one, the whole, I can choose what media I'm going to, watch or read. Yeah, that's true. But, I, as a person, would have to agree with you that is a problem. That, first of all, because, there are a lot of people who don't see that as a problem. And then the second one is there are people, we can say we don't need to be, following after celebrity, leaders, but there are plenty of people who don't even see that as celebrity leaders. There are plenty of people who don't even think there's a problem with the sermon-centric Sunday. We cannot agree as Christians what the problems are. And so I think that's a problem.
Right. And I think to Dalrymple's point, you're not going to see those problems until you're in a community with diverse people and you're in real relationship with them and you're having these kinds of conversations. But
right. And I've known people who have actually they've moved. They wanted to leave an area and move to a place that is more conservative and shares their values. I mean, move states, not just move churches.
That's the big sort. That's what we're talking about. And it's happening. It's been happening for decades, but it's accelerating now.
Hey, Skye.
Yeah.
Hey, Skye, how do you and I know when we've become celebrity leaders? Because I had lunch with a friend of mine a few days ago, and our lunch was interrupted twice by people who recognized me and wanted to say what big fans they were of the podcast.
Yeah,
so
but
when have I crossed the Rubicon and I've become part of the problem?
Well, you've already crossed the Rubicon.
I
mean,
remember,
look at
Phil, way back when long before the podcast, when you and I would have lunch once in a while and we'd go somewhere and you were getting people stopping you then as the VeggieTales guy. So you've been living in that for decades.
Yeah, but it's bad. I need to be anonymous.
I don't think it's that celebrity in and of itself is wrong. I think it's when we make celebrity in and itself the reason for authority, right? Like,
okay.
I mean, if you were able to tell a whole group of people, I mean, right now, I'm not sure that there are a ton of people listening to you and Skye that are making a big, huge statement on the national stage, but if you were telling people to go out and, picket the Capitol, I think that you have made celebrity status,
If they do it. Yeah.
If they do it.
I guess.
Well, I mean, think of N.T. Wright. He's kind of as big a celebrity as you can be in the world of theological professors, right? And scholars.
Okay.
He's a celebrity, but I would argue from the degree that I know him and from what I've read of him, like he's having a very positive Christian influence with his voice and his platform. And I respect him for it. There are other very influential Christian celebrities that I don't think have the depth or godliness or intelligence or humility, and nonetheless are having a massive influence in a way that is not aligned with Christ and his kingdom. But because they're a huge deal, people follow them. So it's not all the same. And the problem is we've made celebrity in and of itself a goal, and that's madness rather than godliness.
But can I just ask you guys a question?
Yes, Christian.
So we maybe I'm wrong, and Skye, please correct my thinking. But I do kind of think that this ugliness inside our hearts as, a collective group is only going to get worse as time goes on. If you believe what the Bible says in the prophecy books, maybe it's, right?
No.
You don't think so?
Go for it, Phil.
Well, it depends on how you're using the books of prophecy to situate ourselves in the story. If we feel like at a point where everything is just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until, Jesus comes back, you're situating yourself in a very specific time, because there have always been times of, apostasy and reformation or revival. And so where we are, is this something cyclical or is it something terminal? I think is we are not in a good position to determine that. I think my wife has decided that the Earth definitely has an expiration date, and the more she learns about global warming is like, oh yeah, we're definitely headed for the end at some point, but still that could be 100, 200 years away. We could get better before we get worse. I'm just not sure how, especially as technology keeps providing us with more selective worldviews, and slicing us into even smaller sub-demographics for marketing purposes. And that's why the only reason Facebook wants you in a group of like-minded peers is so they can sell ads to you at a higher CPM. That is it. That is the only reason. It doesn't serve anyone's best interest to be only around people that think just like you, except advertisers. So, it is our commitment to ad-supported free enterprise capitalism that we want to chop people up in little boxes and make sure they, stay there so they can be marketed to. And if we don't reject that in some way, it does look pretty bleak.
If you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, I think it's a Netflix documentary. It's all about this. Good. It's really, really illuminating, and just another reason why Facebook is Satan's urinal.
Is that on a T-shirt? Can we put that on a T-shirt? So, and this is how Tim Dalrymple concludes. So perhaps we can begin to build bridges across our informational worlds. Perhaps we can nurture a healthy media ecosystem that offers a balanced view of the world and a generous conversation about it. Perhaps we can restore a culture of leadership defined by humility over celebrity and integrity over influence. Perhaps we can invite those who have found counterfeit community in their political tribes to rediscover a richer and more robust community in Christ. Or perhaps not. He doesn't say that, but that's me saying it. Just like, okay,
what gives me hope?
perhaps.
What gives me hope is I think all those things he just outlined are happening, and they will happen. But
in small pockets.
Exactly.
In small pockets.
Yeah.
So do we just need to be happy, finding a small pocket of function in a landscape of dysfunction?
Well, that sounds very
I think we
gospel-like.
I think that we need to work to be agents of healing, change, and reconciliation, not only in our own pockets, but outreaching to other pockets.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially our family. It's the toughest in our families where we disagree, just like you said, Phil.
Right. And in our family, we keep vacillating between just don't say anything about that topic. Just don't say anything about that topic. Say, hi, I like your new dress on Facebook. Congratulations on your grandkids. Whee! But don't actually engage.
And I think
what
that's
just posted.
That same instinct is happening in whole congregations and churches and even denominations that are saying, we're just not going to go there. We're not going to talk about it. And if you don't, at some point, you are failing to form disciples of Jesus, and you are not addressing clear disunity that exists in the body because you just don't want to deal with the mess. And on an interpersonal level, I can understand that, but on a congregational level and as a pastor or church leader, that's malpractice. At some point, you have to address this stuff.
Okay.
This reminds me of your tricky bits from what's in the Bible, Phil.
Right.
I think this is a tricky bit.
We are awash in tricky bits these days. Awash, I tell you, in tricky bits. Okay, we have a guest. They're going to be amazing. You're going to love it. Skye interviewed them, did a perfect interview, probably going to win awards. Jason
I can show you the way.
Jason didn't make the tech crash this week, so good job, Jason. You did a great job. Christian's movie. You can watch it on what's the date to watch your movie?
Yeah, so it's May 19th at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You guys can find the details at thegirlwhoworefreedom.com/festivals, and it is only $10. So this is a great time.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. Thanks especially to our Patreon supporters who help us pay the bills, help pay the crew that works on this, and also help us fund some new ideas that we're trying to put together. And we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
You'll often hear Christians use cliches when talking about prayer, and they say things like, prayer works. But what does that mean? Prayer works to accomplish what? Is it to get God to do something he wouldn't otherwise do? Does prayer working mean that we get what we want, as if God is some kind of divine vending machine in the sky and prayer is just a transactional way in which we manipulate him on our behalf? What is really the purpose and meaning of prayer? I'd argue that an awful lot of us have a very pagan vision of prayer rather than a Christian one. And that's why I wrote my latest book, What If Jesus Was Serious About Prayer? It looks at his parables and teachings on prayer and offers us a completely different vision of what it's for and why we should engage it. It also offers us guidance on how to engage it as Jesus did, which was way beyond what we've been taught in so many of our Christian communities and churches. Perhaps the best thing about What If Jesus Was Serious About Prayer is it's super accessible for anyone. Each chapter is just a few pages and includes a doodle or drawing or illustration that captures the point I'm trying to make in that chapter. So anyone can read it and understand it and come to a profoundly different vision of what it means to truly relate to God. So if that's what you need right now, I encourage you to pre-order What If Jesus Was Serious About Prayer wherever you order your books from. And when you read it, I hope you'll discover that prayer isn't primarily about getting answers, but it's about getting God. I like to refer to my guest today as the most interesting evangelical in the world. Because every time I talk to Dr. Bob Roberts Jr., I learn that he's doing some new crazy thing with some unexpected partner in some far-flung part of the world. He just has the most amazing stories and opens doors that you would think were impossible to open. Bob Roberts is the founder of GlocalNet, a nonprofit dedicated to mobilizing the church to transform the public square. You'll hear stories about that in our interview today, but he's also a local church pastor. He is the senior global pastor at Northwood Church in Keller, Texas, and he's also the host of a relatively new podcast called Bold Love, in which he interviews people from different faith backgrounds whom he partners with to engage in all kinds of great things around the world. In this conversation with Bob, you're going to hear how joyful it is for him to connect with people outside of the Christian bubble, and that infectious reality, he says, is something that the rest of us have to catch a vision for, not just for the sake of the world, but also for the sake of our own faith, if it's going to become truer and deeper and something that we pass on to the next generation. Here is my conversation with Dr. Bob Roberts Jr. Bob Roberts, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Skye, I'm glad to be here.
I was looking back at our archives, and it's hard to believe, but the last time you were on the show was episode 172 in 2015. It's been a while.
It's been a long time.
And as we were sharing before I started recording, you are one of my favorite people to talk to because you're kind of the evangelical equivalent of the Dos Equis most interesting man in the world character. Because every time I talk to you, you are brunching with some Afghan warlord, or you're traveling with some Saudi prince, or you're in Vietnam doing some amazing, I mean, you have all these crazy stories. So I always love engaging with you, Bob. I'm glad you're back.
Well, Skye, I'm glad to be here. I like engaging with you too. And you know what fascinates me? I didn't know you were Indian descent.
Half at least, yeah. My
But
father's
see,
side.
that's cool. So Ibu Patel, you and I have a mutual friend.
Mhm.
Every time we're together, Ibu and I talk about you.
Really? I haven't seen Ibu in a couple of years now, I think. And we're both in Chicago.
Ibu's doing great.
Well, I got to have him on the show.
You really do.
He and I grew up together. We went to elementary
know.
school together. So we have
I know
long
you did.
history.
And I'm disappointed. I don't understand why you didn't leave him faith in Jesus. You know, if you read his first book, he seriously searched all the religions. And Skye, it's your fault. He's going to hell. I'm just brokenhearted you didn't do a better job than what you did.
It is clearly my fault. I'll tell you one story. Many, many years we hadn't seen each other probably since high school. And I don't even remember the circumstances, but we reconnected and we went out to lunch together in Chicago. And our food came at the restaurant, and I said, "Can I pray?" And he said, "Sure." So I prayed, and we went out with our meal. We're reconnecting, talking about our families and spouses and kids and just everything that's going on. And then, I don't know, a couple hours into the conversation, he interrupts and he says, "Hey, can I just talk about something that happened earlier?" I'm like, "Yeah, what?" And he said, "In your prayer before our meal, you prayed in Jesus' name." And I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "I just really want to thank you for doing that." And I said, "Well, I'm a Christian. That's kind of what we do." And he said, "No, you don't understand. Because as a Christian, you were open and praying in Jesus' name before our meal. You communicated to me as a Muslim that it's safe for me to be a Muslim here because you're not going to hide being a Christian."
Isn't that good?
Yeah, and because he said so often when he's with people of other faiths, like they feel like they have to water down their own faith beliefs in order to make him feel comfortable as a Muslim. And I'm like, well, I think you should be who you are. I'm going to be who I'm going to be. And let's just build a connection on honesty and authenticity rather than dancing around our differences.
I agree.
So anyway, I love Ibu. He's a great guy. Okay, let's talk about a little bit of your own faith and where you're at. As I mentioned, you connect with people all over the world in a lot of different ways. You have relationships with tons of Muslim leaders, Jewish leaders, I'm assuming even faiths beyond that, Sikhs perhaps. How has your own faith as a Christian changed and developed through these connections with leaders of other faiths?
Dramatically. I would not hold to the beliefs that I did had I not been engaged with people of other faiths.
You're not saying that you've like abandoned Orthodox Christianity or something.
No. But
Right.
Except for the virgin birth and a few things like that, I've let go of because I'm teasing you, Scott. Probably shouldn't tease like that.
Everyone's just like,
Yeah.
what's the Holy Post doing?
I am probably more Orthodox today than I was when I started working with people of other faiths. I was in Saudi Arabia a few years ago, And a reporter came up and he asked me, it was on live television, and he said, being around all the Muslim leaders and the top Islamic scholars, what has it done to you in understanding Islam and your faith? And I said, oh my word, it's made me a better Christian. And he said, what? And he's, we're on live TV, so he's trying to get it worked around. I said, no, because here's the thing. You made me question everything I was ever taught. So I had to ask myself, do I really believe this? Or do I believe this just because of what I've been told?
Right.
And so here's what I would say. You know, Skye, the way we got our books in the Bible and theology was because of the heretics. It wasn't like, boy, we got it all put together. Let's sit down and put it down now where everyone can know exactly what we believe. No, it was Marcion and many of the other people who came along. And so we had to nail down the book so there would be no question.
Well, even Paul's letters in the New Testament are often written to refute heresies going on in particular churches. So he wrote those letters because there was bad teaching.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened to me. So, for example, I'm going to be candid with you. I used to be okay on the Trinity, but I'm very passionate about the Trinity.
Right.
I realize it's just not a theology we can't understand. It's our definition of God.
Right. It is the very center of Christian faith.
It is the essence of what we believe. So if I don't believe the Trinity, I'm not a Christian. Now, I may be another religion that's a cousin to Christianity or whatever, but the equality of Jesus with God and that he is God, that's a big deal. That's my definition of God. Here's something I say, and I know your viewers can't see this, but I say it this way. I started sharing this. I realized this 2 or 3 years ago. When I started out as a pastor, if this represented the whole scope of my faith, and this represented the whole scope of all Christianity, I had positions on everything, even if I didn't understand it. So if John Piper believed this about election, that's what I believed, even if I didn't understand it, because Piper, that was his position. He was smarter than me. But in my walk, as I've worked with people of other faiths, my theology has actually done this. And what's happened is, it's gone down the core essence of what it is. Like, who is Jesus? What is the gospel? What is the authority of the scripture? So all this other stuff, I have no clue when Jesus is coming back. I can't say for sure, how do you know you're an elect or not? All of those things are pure speculative theology by which we've built entire denominations. So I don't think about that anymore because most Muslims and Jews and Buddhists and atheists and Hindus could care less. Their question is there a God and who is he and what difference does it make? And so what happened is it shrunk my theology dramatically down to what are the core essentials. Something else crazy happened, Skye. When my theology shrunk dramatically, my love of other people grew dramatically. Now, when my theology was really wide, my love of people was narrow. When my theology was narrow, my love of people was wide.
How do you explain that correlation?
People. I got to know people. And so it's sitting at the table in Qatar and a rabbi saying, come on, Bob, admit it. You guys really believe in 3 gods. And the imam goes, you should be more respectful. But answer us, Bob. How do you do that? And I really believe this stuff about the gifts of the Spirit and the Holy Spirit gives you insights. And I said, it's not that there are 3 gods, it's one, but you believe God has 99 names as a Muslim. Some of the rest of you believe different views about God. Here's what I believe. God is one, but 3 essences. And you're right. God is holy and cannot touch sin as God the Father, which makes God the Son necessary because God the Son is still the Father while he's in human form identifying with man because he loves them, but dealing with the impurity. And so here he's going to ask us to live this radically holy Christian life, which is impossible without the Holy Spirit. So to live like the Son, to be in the family, in the world that the Father has created, all of us in his image, takes the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all one, but as they function in our life in different manners and so forth.
Okay, so to back up a minute to your original answer, there's so many people out there who are fearful of the diversity we're seeing just in American society. Forget the global realities, but just America and the diversity that's happening here. And their kids are being raised in environments where they're encountering lots of non-Christian people, non-Christian ideas. And there's this sense that if we really let people experience that and engage that, it's going to be a threat to the preservation of their faith. Your experience, my experience, has been precisely the opposite, that when we engage that broader world, it deepens our faith. It causes us to question things and to look for answers and grow in love, even as we shrink the number of perhaps theological things that we are certain about. So what do you tell people, you're in Texas, in the Bible Belt, what do you tell people who have that sense of fear over the diversity that they are witnessing in their communities and the instinct to kind of retreat into these safe Christian enclaves?
You are never a disciple until you're present in the world. You're not a disciple because you go to church. You're not a disciple because you understand Christian theology. You're not a disciple because you find a nice Christian girl and you marry her, or a Christian guy and y'all go to church. It's impossible. When you read the book of Acts, Paul is everywhere in the public square. He's at Mars Hill. He's at Tyrannus Hall. He's at the amphitheater at Ephesus. He's everywhere. It is impossible to be a truly mature Christian and an effective Christian as Jesus taught and modeled, and Paul taught and modeled, without being in the world. It's just impossible.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, Bob, because somebody would say, okay, I agree with you, but what about the immature disciples? What about the teenagers or the kids who aren't certain of their faith? Isn't it dangerous to send them out into a diverse world where they're going to get bombarded by other ideas? Don't we have to wait until they're really secure in their faith before they're in, the amphitheater or Mars Hill or something like that?
Nope. As a matter of fact, that is the best way to ensure that your kids will become one of the nuns. Keep them in church, hide them from the rest of the world. Don't give them a mind or a theological basis to understand it. Keep them isolated in their relationships from non-Christians, and you got a good shot of losing them. And if you don't lose them, what you're going to have is a marginalized Christian who's disconnected from the world, incapable of fulfilling what Christ has called us to do. I've got my 4-year-old grandson, and I have my Quran class with about 40 Muslims that I go to. There's a Jew and a Muslim, a Harvard professor and me. And so my little grandson will sit in there with me. He's 4, and he likes to stay at the first. His first response is Salam Alaikum, because he wants to hear everybody else say that. Little white-headed, taupe-headed little kid. No, I don't want to keep my kids isolated. I want to talk to them about Jesus, and this is what they believe, and this is what we believe, and you ought to love everybody because this is the world that we live in. Look, our stats bear this out. The fear that people have is wrong, because look at what's happening with the nuns. Look at what's happening with all the Christian young people that are leaving church. It is in mass. And the ones that stay because they're afraid to question within the tribe, they're unprepared. It's real sad, Skye. I was with about 40 or 50 young people, about 25 years of age. They were handpicked across the Metroplex. You'd actually know some of them are. These are people who just rock and roll. And yet, you know what really made me sad? They were superstars in Christian culture, but they're struggling with how to connect with the world. Think about it. Peter didn't struggle with that. The apostles didn't struggle with that. Paul didn't struggle with that. The church at Antioch didn't struggle with that. It's only as we became a subculture in a tribal group. And when we do, we neuter the gospel. See, we think the way that we be a witness is we're going to preach and bring all your lost friends to church. That's not what Paul did. Real evangelism is not doing your events and asking lost friends to come. It's being invited to their events and being the only Christian there and being able to talk about Jesus. When was the last time you had a preaching class on how to talk about Jesus in a mosque or in a synagogue or at a secular forum? How do you talk about Christ? What are the Christians that people, who's ever thought about teaching people to do a 7-minute sermon on the gospel without preaching a sermon and being relevant to the context? This is what we have to do.
So related to that, you have a new podcast. It's season 2 of a new podcast called Bold Love, in which you are curating conversations with, in many cases, other Christians, but also non-Christians. I recently listened to the episode you did on religious freedom with Ambassador David Saperstein and Ambassador Sam Brownback, a Christian and a Jew who have both been ambassadors for religious freedom on behalf of different administrations. Talk about just what's your mindset behind doing the podcast and bringing these kinds of voices on, and who do you want to listen to this, and what do you hope they get from it?
80% of my time and my work is with non-Christians. And I have a very unusual and blessed life in that I'm with non-Christians all the time. And most preachers are with Christians all the time. And so the problem is most church members are also with non-Christians most of their week at work. But you have these guys that are in the pulpits on Sundays who doesn't have many lost friends or non-Christian friends. So they don't know how to relate to, how do you talk to somebody who's LGBTQ? We love to talk about, now here's our position, but who's in relationship with that? What about Muslims? What about Jews? What about all these other people? And so the whole point of the podcast is I want them to get to watch us have conversations where it doesn't feel so foreign to them. I want them to see a faith leader who's friends with lots of non-Christians. That's what I want. And I want to be able to ask the hard questions and realize, like me and Imam Majid, he's been on different things with me. He'll continue to be. Man, we go back and forth all the time. I mean, I have this special Bible. I got him one time and I wrote some prayers for him. And every once in a while, he'll text me one of the verses that I wrote in the front of the Bible. And you know, he's teaching me things about the Quran. Do we disagree? You bet. I mean, when we talk about Jesus, but why do I have to get angry? Why do I have to start screaming, and these people are going to hell, and the Muslims and the Jews and the Buddhists and yada, yada. What is that about? I mean, if I really believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and life, and if I believe that every person is created in the image of God, not just Christians, come on. Wouldn't I have a relationship?
I'll tell you what I've appreciated about the episodes I've listened to of your show is so much of the media that American evangelicals in particular are consuming right now only presents people outside their faith as a danger or a threat, right? Yeah. Every Muslim they encounter in the media is a threat. Every LGBT person or progressive liberal or whatever is a threat. And what you're doing in your podcast is bringing those representatives into the show, but they're not a threat. They're a friend.
Yeah. And that's the whole point. See, here's the problem. Christians have mucked up the public square pretty good. They've gone in as cultural warriors instead of salt and light. And so you see it. I mean, look at all the race issues. You got all these white evangelicals freaking out over CRT. Not that they've given an alternative, not that they're doing anything to build race relations, but they're going to trash everybody else that's trying to do something. Well, why do you have time to even trash somebody else? Why don't you live an alternative? Why don't you say, all right, you're right. We've got racial issues. Let's deal with it. And so I think the problem is we know what we believe. We do not know how to live. We know how to put our list of theses that we hold to, but we don't have a clue about how to practice our faith. And that's why we haven't fixed the racial problem. Everybody says, oh, preach the gospel. Well, they have been preaching the gospel. It doesn't work. It's not the preaching of the gospel. We've got to live it.
I've been, for years, I've been writing a daily devotional. And recently we've been going through a series on Jesus' farewell discourse. And the last week or so, my brain has been all about John 15 and his metaphor of the branch, the vine and the branches. And what's kind of stunning about that, not that this is new, but it's kind of reminded me of it, is Jesus talks about branches that bear good fruit and God will cut them, prune them to bear more fruit. And then the branches that bear no fruit are cut off and thrown into the fire. And what's shocking about that is all these branches are connected to the vine. They all identify as followers of Jesus, but it's the ones that bear good fruit, which are celebrated, and the ones that don't bear fruit are the ones that are cut away. And so your comment there about, well, we know what we believe, but we don't live it. It's like, well, then you're not really, what's the point of believing it? You're a dead branch. Who cares if you're connected to the vine if you're dead and you're not bearing any fruit? So I mean, part of it is kind of a warning where we get so caught up in our tribal identity that we don't actually ask, are we bearing the good fruit of Jesus and his kingdom in our relationships, which then goes on in the chapter about it's about loving one another. That's the good fruit. So it's kind of stirred me up and scared me recently to think about what awaits those of us who identify as Christian but don't actually live what Jesus is calling us to live. And that's what I see you trying to model for your own people and everyone who's listening to your show and engaging the ministries that you're a part of. And may your tribe increase. We need a lot more of that. Okay, let me ask you this. On a recent episode about religious freedom, the one I mentioned earlier, a lot of Christians are getting stirred up about religious liberty and religious freedom. It's becoming a divisive issue in our country. It seems like there's a tension between religious liberty and LGBT rights, and we're not sure how the courts are going to come down on. And one of the things your guest, David Saperstein, said really struck me. To paraphrase, he said that he prays for the day when the biggest problem facing religious freedom overseas is simply a tension between churches and LGBT communities, because the issues overseas are just so enormously huge that what we're looking at in the U.S. is small in comparison. Talk about what you've seen as you've traveled the world and why Christians should care about religious freedom globally, not just for their own churches, schools, businesses here in the U.S.
Because Christians are being persecuted in a tremendous manner right now, and not just Christians. So, for example, India, right now, if you're not a Hindu, it's tough.
Right.
I mean, both the Muslims and the Christians are under tremendous persecution, and we're seeing it like never before. And it's everyone, Skye. Think about it. Myanmar, it's the Buddhist. Who would have thought Buddhists would have been persecutors? But they're the ones who've led to the Rohingya mass movement, to a refugee camp of 1 million people, more people in that refugee camp than anywhere on the face of the earth, squalor and filth. It's the Buddhists that are driving out the Baptists in the Kachin province. The military is now doing the same thing to them earlier. And so I think what we're seeing take place in the world is, with globalization and the connectedness, people are feeling a sense of rootlessness. And so with that, it's let's pull back to our values, our religion. And we're doing the same thing in America, which breaks my heart, because I've been in the Middle East where I'd be with imams. And I mean, we'd hear stuff on the speakers where the imams would be saying horrible things about Christians and America, and we've got to stand up and so forth. Now you hear the same thing in America. You hear pastors, we hear them right here in Dallas on Sunday morning in their pulpit stand up and say that, Muslims are demonic and we've got to stand against them. And this thing is taking place all over the world. And what David was talking about is the persecution is real, and it is. So I see it all the time. I'm in and out of countries where it happens. The difference is I don't show up as a Christian and tell leaders in that country, now you've got to change this. But when there's a Muslim leader, Majid is with me. And Imam Majid does a far better job of speaking to Christian persecution to a Muslim ruler than I would as a Christian white guy showing up, telling a Muslim from another country, don't do that. But when he shows up and he says, listen, you've got Christians in jail. This is wrong. It's not what our faith teaches. It's not just. And in addition, you're making us look bad. This pastor right here in America stands up for our freedom. And I told him you would not tolerate this if you knew it. He uses a little bit of psychology. So I just think it's very serious. And how we treat Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and every other religion is just significant in America. It's having a negative impact on other believers around the world. We have to understand that.
Beyond the impact of other believers around the world, how have recent events in the U.S. or the rising Christian nationalism we're seeing in the American church, is that affecting our credibility nationally as a voice of human rights and religious freedom around the world?
Yes. It's not just affecting it, it's destroying the relationship between the American church and the global church. Now, I know a lot of pastors are saying, no, we go do mission work all over the world. But a lot of times those pastors around the world, when you're showing up and you're working with their church, you're bringing money, you're bringing resources, and frankly, more cultures are more respectful of Americans and other believers than we are of them when they come to us. And so, honestly, American evangelicals generally don't have a realistic view of what the world is like. I tell pastors all the time, I tell Christians all the time, many Christians have gone around the world to do mission work or go on vacation, and they've never seen the world.
Mm-hmm.
Never seen it because they left with their tribe, they connected with their tribe or their activity. They don't understand culture, context, and sadly, they don't care to. And so what's happening is all the divisiveness that we see in America. I mean, I've had pastors from countries all over the world email me, Bob, what's going on? What is this going on? And I think we hurt ourselves when we do that. You know, I've really, I mean, I had one pastor saying, this Donald Trump, I don't understand because I know the positions are right, but why? Here's what I literally had a global pastor ask me. Why do the American pastors around him not call him out for the way he talks about other people? And I've said this before, you know, Trump is Trump, but we have a responsibility as evangelicals. It's fine if we want to pray with the president, fine if we want to praise the president, whoever it is. But if we're going to be in that role in a public manner, then in a public manner, when whatever political leader goes off the rails, if we don't call them out, then we risk confusion about what we really believe. Is the gospel merely transactional? And yes, we've hurt ourselves in a profound way. And for what it's worth, Skye, we've hurt ourselves politically because I work with a lot of ambassadors and diplomats on religious freedom issues, and they see the inconsistency of what's going on in the American church, and they frankly are puzzled by it.
That's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. Knowing that you do have connections with a number of political leaders, both in DC and globally, what do we need to do to rebuild that trust? Is it time for the American Christians to just back off of politics for a while and say, we have completely tainted our role in that part of the world and we just need to reset? Does it mean we just engage differently? What's it going to retake to rebuild that credibility?
I think it's going to take 3 or 4 things. I think number one, we don't have time to talk about this. It's time to redefine missions and the way that we're engaging the world. The biggest obstacle to fulfilling the Great Commission is how we're trying to do it in the world right now. It's not the gospel. I said for years, I understood the Great Commission biblically. I was trained, got my doctor's degree in missiology. The problem is I did not understand the world. So what? You understand the gospel. If you don't understand the world and your audience, how are you ever going to do mission? So
what, I mean, we don't have time to unpack. It's a huge issue, but can you briefly talk about what you mean there? What is it that we're not connecting?
I get nervous about doing this. Number one, it's all got to be public. There is no privacy anymore. The sooner we understand that. Second of all, it's got to be more than positional. When we are in public, we're all about, here's my position. No, it's here's my Jesus. And then it's got to be in private. It's got to be about our relationships with non-Christians, that we have very deep relationships. And then it's got to be into the society. How do we serve people? See, we show up as Christians doing Christian industry. We need to show up as Christians serving and blessing people in every domain of society. Regardless, it's all spiritual work. Okay, so anyhow, enough about that. But back to your original question, I think, number one, we've got to redefine the way that we do missions and engagement. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And by the way, church members are doing it without their churches anymore. That's why you've seen a great move among educators and businessmen and people doing water wells. They're not waiting for their churches anymore. They're saying, basically, preachers, go keep doing your preacher stuff. And keep in mind, those preachers who want to quote the verse, without the preaching of the gospel, come on, guys. The preaching of the gospel they did was with 15 or 20 people. When Paul's talking about that, he's talking about being on Mars Hill, not 30-minute exegetical sermons from books that are in the Bible. So I think that's huge. I think being in public is huge. I think also we've got to transcend politics. I mean, there are people get upset with me when I say this, but I honestly believe that God's will is for some people to vote Democrat, some to vote Republican, and some to vote independent. And that freaks people out. Well, how can that be? There's one person. No, I want to see there be Christian Democrats and Christian Republicans and Christian independents. And I'm going to start a political party, call it Happy Party. I think there ought to be people in every single political party. But I think we should transcend it. I saw a tweet by somebody the other day. It was really good. It was, when was the last time you saw someone shift their politics because of their faith? And it's true. I mean, overwhelming majority of Christians, for example, were very much pro-refugee. I mean, the little baby from Turkey, the 3-year-old.
Horrible. Yeah.
And then the next thing we know, that becomes a positional platform in the 2016 election. And now all the Christians we got too many immigrants, We changed our position overnight because this is what we have to do. If we're going to get a Republican who's going to stop abortion. And it didn't work. And it hasn't worked. And it's not going to work because we're going to have to value every single life, not just unborn lives, but refugees and immigrants and Black lives, and take your pick.
You have an event coming up soon at your church, and you're going to unveil what you've called the Mecca Declaration.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got to come, Scott. It's going to be fun.
When is it happening?
It's October 10 and 11. And it'll be happening at 5:00 Sunday night at our church, Northwood Church, Keller, Texas. And Dr. Mohammed Al-Alisa, he's the head of the Muslim World League. I think he's number 3 in the Muslim world of influential Muslims. And he's in his 50s, and he's a good friend of mine. I've known him for a few years, got to know him a few years ago, and we started speaking together at different events. And about 2 years ago, he came up with they call it the Declaration of Mecca. And it's based on the Meccan charter that the Prophet Muhammad came up with. And it's all about peace, getting along, tolerance, not being at odds with one another. He's a radical leader. Let me tell you what he did. He was the first Muslim cleric of that level to acknowledge the Holocaust happened about 3 years ago.
Is he a Saudi?
He is.
Okay.
He is. He's a legal brain. And so he actually doesn't just acknowledge it. He goes with a trip of Jewish leaders to Auschwitz. And at the monument, do you know what he does? He prays. And all the Muslims got upset with him. Not all of them, just the bad Muslims. The good Muslims were excited for it. And he prayed a prayer of reconciliation. I mean, this guy is reaching out to people. And here I am, an evangelical. This will be the first time there's ever been anyone like that speak in an evangelical church. So it's going to be the first national gathering of Muslims and Christians, evangelicals primarily, from all over the U.S. You got to come. I mean, this is historic. It's going to be a blast. It'll be standing room only. And then the next day, we're going to have Muslims, Jews, and Christians. And all day long, we're going to talk about how do we build bridges and serve the common good and not give up our theology.
So how can people who aren't me learn more or get involved or be a part of this? Do you have a website or somewhere that you want to direct them?
There's going to be a website, but go to glocal.net.
Okay.
There'll be a link at glocal.net.
Well, I look forward to hearing the report on how that goes. And maybe I will be there. I mean, I am now fully vaccinated, so I can travel again.
You ought to come. It's a rare thing. You ought to bring Ibu, and y'all come together, and y'all could have a blast.
Well, I'm so grateful that you are using your influence and your relational connections to bring people together for these kinds of things. What you're doing is an essential ingredient for the thriving of the church in the global reality we're facing and in the pluralism of America. We have to learn these basic skills, which Jesus talks about all the time in Scripture, of just loving your neighbor and seeking the welfare of others. Like, this is not new to our faith, but we've just lost it. And I'm so grateful that you're. I
don't understand why we get so mad all the time. Okay, so I disagree with you. Why am I mad? I disagree with my wife all the time. Am I going to be mad at her all the time? I mean, why can't you say we disagree, but you still bring value? Okay, I got a theory on that. You want to know real quick?
Let's hear it.
I think we see people as sinners instead of saints in the image of God. So when Jesus, the Spirit and the Father created Adam, Scripture's real clear. We were created in the image of God, right? Does it say only Christians were created in the image of God? Not at all. It says we're all created in the image of God. Sinners is something that describes what we do, not our identity. And when I stand up and I speak to a room full of non-Christians, or when I'm around non-Christians, I think the first thing we have to remember is these people are created in the image of God. Am I bearing witness to call them home?
I'm sure you're familiar with this, but it's been on my mind a lot lately. A lot of synagogues have a Hebrew saying that is often printed above where the Torah is kept. And it's usually in Hebrew script, but in English it says, "Know before whom you stand." And the intent in a synagogue is to incite reverence and awe before God as you approach the scriptures and things like that. Know before whom you stand. And that's just been on my mind a lot lately, not just when I'm speaking or when I'm writing and doing my daily devotional. Often I'll think about that, know before whom, like, who am I really accountable to and what I'm doing here? But to carry that with me and realize that when I'm talking to my neighbor, and I have Muslim neighbors, to think about know before whom I stand. I'm standing before people created in the image of God. And
right.
I'm accountable to him in the way I respect and treat them.
You bet.
So it's just been on my mind a lot. I think it's a great gift that synagogues print that in front of their congregants to remember it. And I'm trying to keep that in the front of my mind, as you said, to remember that we are all created in the image of God. And that is the beginning of dignity and respect. And there are going to be differences, certainly, but
sure.
Anger is not the best way to handle those.
I don't think so. And you know, we have a country to show what happens when Christians are driven by anger. People leave the church. We lose credibility in the public square. We start acting like the world. The Pharisees in the New Testament have nothing on us Baptists in American life today. We've become the same moralist provocateurs of righteous living, but it's like Jesus said, you know, you'll travel halfway around the world to make a convert, and he's twice the son of hell. And I fear that we are leading people to an angry Jesus, and he's not like that.
No, he isn't. And I'm grateful to know that there are folks like you who are modeling what it means to be a follower of Christ without having to resort to fear and anger. And we need more of that. So, Bob, thank you again for coming back. Thanks for sharing some of your story and wisdom. And I am seriously going to look at my calendar and see if I can get down there for this event. I think it'd be really fascinating. So
there's going to be a bunch of cool people. I'll turn you loose, and you can interview them on your podcast if you want.
That'd be great. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you, Skye.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Skye Pilot Media, that's Skye's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.